Good afternoon, everyone. So great to see you all here. Well, we're going to be playing with some stitches, and you all know how much I love our Husqvarna Viking stitches. And a lot of them we have on our machines, and we don't really think about using them, especially when you're quilting and you're working with all kinds of different projects. We're so motivated to just move through the project without necessarily thinking about how we can use our stitches. So I did bring over my little wall hanging here, just for you to think about all of the beautiful stitches we have. It's not just the applique stitches and the pop-up stitches and the sequin stitches, but today we're going to start working with pictograms, which we've had pictograms around for over 30 years. They were actually the originals before embroidery. We use pictograms to create embroidery. And I have an example of something I did, and I just did this yesterday, and I had so much fun doing it. So this is, wait a second, let me see if I can get that better in there. Now, doesn't that look like an embroidery? But really, this whole design started with putting together two pictograms to create this flower. And I stitched along the background there to give it like a little bit of a shape, which I drew with a pencil and a bowl before I started. And then I used some of my applique stitches. Now, we tend to think when we're working with stitches, we tend to think about doing stitches in straight lines, but they're really not meant to be used like that. We have all kinds of fun things we can do with our stitches. And here's an example. I'm making a little village. And in this village, I use these floating stitches to sew my strips together. And we have beautiful satin stitches that I use for my appliques. And then up here, I've used sequin stitches and all kinds of fun different stitches. And it really adds a lot of dimension to the projects we're doing. This Christmas tree, I've used the pop-up stitches, and I've used sequin stitches and all kinds of fun ones too. And so what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our machine, and Amy's here, and if you've got any questions, I'll stop maybe after 5 minutes and let Amy know if you've got a question, and then she'll come on and we'll talk. So don't be shy about asking questions. You know, I love questions. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is just go in and make this pictogram design. And I'm just going to switch over to my cameras here. And I have, oh, look at that, the screensaver's on. So these are some of the pictograms that we have. And I can scroll up and show you how many more we have. Now, right now, I have my projection on, which means that when I select a stitch, because I'm on the Epic 3 or the Quilt 97, if I change, and I'll change my camera just so you can see, if I select a stitch like that, it's going to show me what it looks like. Now, I would never use that stitch exactly the way it is, and it's not meant to be used like that. These stitches are meant to be put together and programmed together in different ways. So no matter what Husqvarna Viking you have, even the opals, they all have pictogram stitches. Not maybe as many as this, but they all do have pictogram stitches. So I'm going to start with that stitch. But when I want to program in different stitches together, on my Epic 3 or on my Quilt 97, Epic Quilt 97, I'm going to go to create sequence. And for the older machines, they use the word program. So you're going to go to program. All right. And right now there's no stitches. So I'm going to go to my menu, and I will go to that menu of stitches, which is in the I menu under building blocks, because anything that you're seeing in the building blocks, this is where you go to put things together. So we're looking for I3, and I'm going to select this stitch. All right. And if I make that menu go a little bit smaller, you're going to see up here, there's the stitch. And then the next stitch I'm going to do is stitch number 5. So that is not looking very nice, but if I mirror image it top to bottom, it makes it more look like a flower. Now, the other thing that I can do in here, and I can go back and forth from one stitch to the other, the one that's highlighted is the one I'm making adjustments to, is I can go and I can change the density of that stitch individually. And I went from a 4 down to a 2. So that means there's more stitches per inch. And now I'm going to come back to the second stitch and I'm going to do the same thing. So they'll both have that same level of density. If I wait until after I'm finished here and I touch the check mark and now I'm ready to sew, let me close that up. I do still have the ability to change the density. If I touch the toggle where the length is, that will adjust the density. And you can see it's recognizing that I made that change. And I can also change the length of it. But at this point, this is going to stitch a series of stitches, and I don't want it to do that. I want it to do one petal and then stop. So I'm going to come back in, touch and hold, and go back into Edit Sequence. And this time at the end of that, I'm either going to put in a stop or I'm going to use the selective thread cutter. So the stop would be the X, and then it will do that one flower and stop, or I can touch the scissors, and now it is programmed in a cut. So it will do one petal and then cut. All right, and now I'm going to touch the check mark, and on my screen, you're going to see there's one petal and then the cut. And when I switch my camera over to sew it, all right, you're going to see, actually, there's a picture of the scissors right here. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. I might not be able to there. Do you see the scissors? It's actually showing you in the projection the scissors, so you know that you've put that cut in there. All right, I'll come back out a little bit. All right, and so this is how I started that last project that I did. All right, and you can see I just marked a line, and then I did a satin stitch around that line, but I didn't think of it until after I did my first flower. So I literally did the flower first, and I know where my needle is going to be the start of that petal, and then the rest of that petal is going to be finishing right there. Now, a couple of other things you might want to think about when you're doing this is, and you've heard me saying this before, when I am working with satin stitches, especially when I'm working with very dense designs, I often will change my thread portioning and go down a little bit so that the satin stitch is poofier looking. And if you're going to use a very heavy satin stitch, you might also want to go to the presser foot pressure and lighten the presser foot pressure up a little bit. Now, it does show me that I'm going to be, it suggests to use the B foot, which is what I have on. And I also have that symbol for stabilizer. So I do have the stabilizer on. I'm actually not 100% sure what needle I have, but these are my recommendations. And you can see here that where it shows the needle is in the down position. That's letting me know that I've already selected that on the screen. Because if I turn that off, that will go away. All right. See, now it goes away. That's because I've turned it off. So when I turn it back on, then I know that I have that selected and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to switch over my camera and I'm just going to show you one of these designs. Now, when I did this the very first time, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it or not. So I'll usually start by just using a scrap piece of paper and testing the shape. And it does look nice and full here. And if I was to go back to the length of that and change the density to that and change it, as I change the shape, do you notice how the shape is changing? So the projection is actually showing exactly the shape that I have. And if I shorten it up or I lengthen it, it's going to change the look of it. Okay, so I'm going to change the length to 16.4 and make my petal a little bit shorter. And when I start, I'm just going to start sewing. And I can put my foot on the petal because when it's finished the petal, it's going to cut. Stop. See, look at that. It's stopping and it's cutting the shape. All righty. And there is my first petal. Isn't that fun? Now, this is where I would evaluate, do I have enough fullness in there, or would I like to make it a little more denser? And so I think I should make it a little more denser because I can see a little bit of the fabric behind it. So I'm going to come back. and come back to my screen, and where it says the difference where the length is and the density, I'm just going to go down and I'm going to make it even more. Now look at how dark that gets. So you can see that's going to be quite a bit denser, and that's all I'm going to do. Now, if I felt like I was happy with that, then I'm just going to go to my next position, and I'm going to be ready to stitch it out again. So there's the first petal. And if I wanted to, I could always go and do that again. But I'm going to wait and see, because sometimes I'll end up, now I don't mark the positions, but if you felt like you needed some help, you could always draw a line where you wanted the petals to go. I do them kind of randomly. I'm not worried about the petals looking exact. You can see on the one that I've done here, they're not exact. These are not in the exact same place, but I think it kind of ends up making it look a lot more natural if you're not too perfect in your placement. And I'm more going for a natural look. So I'm just going to start, and I'm always going to take my thread and put it underneath the foot to the back. And then it's going to cut. All right. And look at there. Now I've got my second petal. And you can see this one is fuller looking. And I think that's probably a good place to be. But let's just check with Amy. Is there any questions so far, Amy?
No questions yet. Just everybody saying hi, Karen.
Oh, that's so nice. It's so great for you all join me. Thank you so much. All right. Now, when you think about putting those combinations together with those pictogram stitches, every single combination you put together is going to give you a completely different look. And that's the way our stitches are meant to be used. They're not meant to just use them one at a time. You're meant to put them together and create all kinds of different looks to them and different petals and things. I'm not going to go on and do too much more about that, but I do want to show you where I got some of these leaves and different petals from, because I think that's, once you start thinking about putting them together, then it really does make you a little bit more adventuresome to try something like this. And I've got some fish here. These are in the building blocks too. I'm making a little bit underwater fish tank going on here. So I'm going to show you how they work, and I'm going to show you how some of the other quilt designs in there, because in that menu that has the building blocks, there are all kinds of fun stitches that are in there. All right, so I'm going to go back to my screen, and let's look at these stitches right here. Now, I love these leaves. I think those are gorgeous, and they can be found in the applique menu. So if you have applique stitches on your machine, and we have a lot of machines that have applique stitches, right? Because they started with the Epic 1, 2, and 3. The Sapphire 85's got them on. Now, and I can't guarantee what stitches every machine has, but most of them do have these stitches. So in the H menu, as you scroll down, you'll actually see these are a set of 2 leaves. And as you go down, this is the leaf I used. And I think that's just a gorgeous leaf to use in this way. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? And I only wanted one of them, so I touched the stop button on the front of my Epic 3, and this works on all the different machines. And now I have one leaf. So look at how gorgeous those leaves and how natural they look. And so if you've never seen, Amy, let me know if anybody has never seen the way applique stitches, because I'll show them how to do that if it comes up. All right. But look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Now, we also do have many other of these leaf shapes that you will find in your different menus. When you go back in and you start looking through all your menus of stitches, they're not just what's in there under, and let me think whether it's this and that. All right, there's all kinds of different shapes and different fun stitches. Look at all of these great stitches here. And as I go into the different stitches, I really encourage you to kind of go through and look at some of the stitches. Oh, I know where they are. I think they're in crafting or quilting. Let's check quilting here. And we'll go in. Nope. No, it's not there. So it must be in the crafting. And they were a lot of the leaves in the F menu, but they changed it. Ah, there we are, under crafting. So in the Epic 3 and the Quilt 97, you're going to find them in the B menu, all of these different leaf shapes. But on some of the other machines, you're going to find those under the F menu. And there's a lot of fun things that are in there. So this leaf right here was the one that I used for this one right here and that one right there. Okay. And the nice thing about, yes?
You told me to interrupt, so I'm going to.
No, that's good.
Somebody would, in fact, like to see you demo those applique leaves.
All righty. I will do that for you. Hold on 1 second. All right. I'm just going to get a piece of fabric here, and then we'll be ready. All right. So if I wanted to do a leaf, I'm going to do it. Let me go back and get that applique. All right, because these applique stitches are phenomenal, and sometimes we don't think about using them. So I'm going to come get the leaf shape that I wanted, and I only want one of them, so I'm going to touch the stop button, so it'll do that. And this is where you really get to see how fun the projection is. Now, sometimes it's hard when you're building designs like this to think about what a shape is going to look like or what the leaf is going to look like. But because on the Epic 3, I have projection, it's actually showing me on my fabric how big the leaf is going to be. And, you know, some of you might have maybe thought about trading up to an Epic 3 and you never really thought about, well, why would it be important? Well, this is why the projection is so important, because I know exactly where that stitch is going to go. And I know exactly what it's going to look like before I start sewing. And so it's a lot easier to place stitches like that. I'm going to put a green thread in just to make it look prettier. All right. And the first part of this stitch, let me just thread my machine here. There we go. And touch my automatic needle threader up here. Wait a second. I don't know if I can get my camera to go up there. This one right there. All right. All right, so the way applique stitches work, it does say that it recommends putting the S foot on. So I'm going to put on my S foot. All right. Excuse my hands being in the way here. And where it starts is where I'm seeing the picture. You see the stem? That's where it's going to start. So I'm going to put my foot down and I'm going to just start sewing. And I think this is where I want the placement to be. I want it to kind of come over that line. And so what happens is the Epic 3, or if you have another machine, if you've got applique stitches, it's going to stop at the right time. So you don't even have to think about it. You can use the start stop button, or you can use, I'm just getting a piece of a square. They usually recommend about a 2-inch square. All right. And if I'm doing something for a quilt or something that I know I'm going to want to be able to wash a lot, then often I'll put a piece of Heat and Bond light on the back of that. But for this, I'm just going to put it underneath here, because then when you cut away the edge of that fabric, it'll give you a really nice firm edge. All right. And so I'm going to press the start stop button. It's going to sew backwards over that fabric. It knows where it's got to go. I just have to let it go there. Now it's doing the vine in the middle of the leaf, and then it'll come out and do the curly Q, and then it stops, and I'm going to touch my scissors, and there I have one leaf. And then I'll come back over to my camera here and show you this. Okay, so there it is. So then I'm just going to come in and trim it. I probably should have left it on the close-up, but I wanted to show you this on a, all right, I'm just trimming away the edge of the fabric. There we go. So there's my leaf. Isn't that fun? And I generally will trim my threads as I'm going to keep everything looking nice. But as I think it would have looked prettier if I'd had a little more contrast between my thread and the leaf color, but you can see how fast a design can build up when you're using your stitches like that. And our applique stitches are so much fun, and they can be used in a lot of different ways. And I think sometimes we don't realize that there are so many leaf shapes that are in there, and they really are fun to add to what you're working with. Okay, so I'm going to go and we're going to change our menu. Amy, does anybody have any other questions?
I don't see any more questions, but we did have somebody on Facebook make a great suggestion, which I would love to share since the people on YouTube don't see those comments.
Okay.
But she recommends making a stitch Bible to have as a reference. And what the way that she does it is she takes a third of it and shows what the regular stitch is. And then she does the stitch again as long as you can make it, and then does it again as wide as you can make the stitch. What a great idea to do that.
It is a great idea. And that's kind of like, I mean, I think we don't do ourselves a service by not playing around with the stitches and doing them, right? And that's what I did with my piece of fabric, was just play out with them. But if you have the time, just get yourself a piece of fabric and a piece of stabilizer. You can either mark it in with a pen what it is, or you can do it fancy and actually create a whole embroidery file for it if you want to. But but I want to add to that though, because if it's a satin stitch, the other thing I would like to do is see what it looks like with the density of that it's made for, which is usually around a 3 or a 4, and then change the density down and see, because almost always you're going to like the stitch better when you change the density, unless you're using a thicker thread. And so that's why they've got it in there, so you can adjust that. Okay. All right. I'm going back to my Epic 3, and this time I'm going to choose a menu that in the building blocks that you can find, and there's all of these different stitches, and these are on the Epic 2 and the Epic 3 and the Quilt 97, but I'm going to just choose the stitch. I think I'm going to choose stitch number 12. And now I have one stitch. You can see what that looks like. But I want to put a combination of stitches together. So I'm either going to go to programming or create sequence. And I'm going to put 2 stitches together, because that's kind of what I want you to realize, how much more interesting these stitches are. And this time I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to choose stitch number 12 and stitch number 11. Okay. And I do have an example of what it looks like, or something like this, but I'm going to just show you how this works. All right. And I should have shown you, sorry, I had my wrong camera. Let me just double check here. Yeah, we're okay. We're good. So I'm going to change over to this camera, and these stitches in that menu have a programmed in stop. And it's a good idea if you could mark your lines like the quarter, that you've got like a cross here in the middle, but I didn't do that. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to press the start button, and it's going to sew. And now I'm going to turn around and come back, and look at that. Isn't that amazing how you can see that it lines up like that? All right. And I'm going to go and I'm going to sew, and it's going to come back and meet in the middle here. Unless I pulled it out of action here. All right, so every time it stops, I'm going to trim that thread away afterwards. Now I'm going to come over here and go in the opposite direction. And then I'm going to turn around and come back this way. And this is a lot easier to do if you have it, your actual cross marked in the center, because then you know you're sewing straight. All right. These are fun stitches that you can make all kinds of quilt designs out of. And now I'm going to turn it around and come back to the center again. And I'm kind of lining up that point. And now I've got one more direction to go. Coming back to the center, I'm going to cut my thread here and get rid of that. And this time I'm just looking for that to line up. And I'll cut it. Now you can see at the end, I pulled my fabric a little bit. It didn't line up there perfectly, but look what a fun design that made. And if you're looking, I'll show you the other ones that I did. I'll come back over to my camera. So look at that. There's one that I did. That's both sides to it. That's the same design done twice. And this is the same design just going out there once. So you can create all kinds of really fabulous quilt designs that are great for your blocks, depending upon what size you're doing. And it does make sense to kind of like mark across here and then diagonally. So when you're doing it, you know you're going in the right direction. But those are pretty fun stitches, aren't they? And it's just something that we often don't think about using, but there's a lot of fun ways that you can create borders and all kinds of different ones. I'll go back and I'll show you one other creative stitch that you can make. That is, so this one I did with putting a combination of stitch 12 and stitch 11 together. And that created this, and that's what it looks like on the back. I have a fuchsia on the back. And but the combinations of things you can put together are really pretty phenomenal once you start playing with it. So let me come back to my machine, and right now I want to go back to create sequence, and this time I'm going to go to that same menu of stitches. All right, it was menu I, and you can find these on the Epic 2 also. And I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to bring in stitch number 23. Now that's one simple little stitch. It doesn't look like very much, does it? I'm going to make the length of it longer. And then I'm going to put 2 other stitches. I'm touching duplicate and I have 2 of them in there. I'm going to mirror image the last one. And then I'm going to touch duplicate again. So this is what it looks like. But when I'm finished and I touch the check mark, look at the brand new stitch that was created. And that's a gorgeous, gorgeous stitch that you could use in a quilt border in all kinds of places. So those building blocks that you're finding there, that is giving you some really fun looks, and it's called Motif Builder. Okay. Now, the other things we have in this menu are, these are guided pictograms. This is how I did the fish. And there's all of these different shapes here. You've got trees and you've got bigger stars and all kinds of fun things. But I'm going to go to where the fish is just to show you that. All right. And when you're looking at that, it tells me that I should have the projection on, which I do. So that's good. And when I'm looking, I'm going to do this one on my fixed fabric so you can see what it's going to look like. All right. Whoops, sorry about my camera. So the way it's going to start is going to start with the mouth first. So I'm going to have this fish going in this direction, and I'm going to decide where I want it to be. And then I'm going to use the start stop button with these stitches. So when I touch the start stop button, it's going to sew this way, and then it's going to stop. All right. And it's recommending that I put the A foot on, and I don't have the A foot on. So I'm going to put on the foot that it recommends. If I can find my A foot, maybe I can't. Oh, let's use the open toe foot. I think the open toe foot will be a good foot for this to use, because then I can still use my IDF, which is my built-in walking foot. All right. So now I'm ready to go. So you can see when it stops. Now this projection line is set up so that I can start sewing. Before I start sewing, I need to put that dotted line on the last stitch that I sewed, which is right there. This line is where I'm going, but the dotted line is where I came from. And let me just cut that thread out so it's not so distracting, okay? So every time I do this, and you can find these stitches on the Epic 3 and on the Quilt 97. So I'm going to put my foot on the pedal. And you can see that the Epic 3 stopped. And now I'm going to move it so that the dotted line, which is this dotted line here, is on the last line that I stitched. And the solid line is where I'm going to be traveling to. All right. Now this one's a little bit different. I'm going to scroll over here, and there is my dotted line. I'm changing directions here. Okay, and I rotate it. And this time I'm going to rotate it so it's going straight down through the tail. And you can see it's kind of doing a parallel line. So I can kind of control that. And look at that. Now it's my last stitch. And this time I don't really worry too much about this because I just want to sew back to that point. And this is where having that projection line can really help me. And it landed exactly where I needed it to be. And then I have my new fish that I can decorate. All right, so that's the one that I just did. Over here, you can see I've added some scallop stitches to it. And in this one here, I've added some sequin stitches. Over here, I went kind of a little bit wild and did all these different combination of sequins and some scallop stitches. Some of them I just colored in with fabric markers. And this one here, I put this is like a swimsuit material. So I made an applique with it. And that's kind of a fun look because it gives you something a little bit different. And I'll come back over and so you can see all the different fish. I particularly like the applique one. I love the iridescence of that swimsuit fabric. So you can get some really fun looks with that. But you have trees and all kinds of fun shapes that you can make. You could make yourself a cocktail drink or something else. And you can put any of these things can also be appliques if you want them to be. So let's see, Amy, does anybody have any questions?
We do have a couple of questions. Somebody wants to know, and I'm assuming that it is on those guided pictogram stitches, that will your fabric feed correctly if it's actually like a quilt sandwich? Will there be any issues with it feeding?
No, because I did that. I just particular for that. You see this? I actually do have a layer of batting in there that's not fused because I wanted you to be able to see that you can use it for that purpose. All right. And this one too, I usually do demonstrate it when I've got batting and the batting's not fused. Oh, this one's fused on the back. I did use fusible for this one, but I stitched it from this side where there was no fusible. And so it does a pretty nice job without that. And if you felt that you wanted to, that it was moving, you certainly could put a couple of pins in. I generally don't. If it's a bigger quilt, though, you're going to want to stabilize it in some way before you start doing that. I personally like to stitch in the ditch because when you stitch in the ditch, you're kind of like keeping all the straight lines straight. And then everything else kind of feeds into place without you having to worry about it too much. If you're not going to stabilize it, then put some pins in to stop the fabric from shifting at all when you're working. That's all I would say. Okay.
And we do have another question. And again, I'm assuming it's about the guided pictograms. She wants to know, how do you know when to turn it?
So every time there's one stitch, it's going to stop at the end of that stitch. And unfortunately, you don't know what it's going to look like until you actually experiment with what happens if you keep going, or what happens if you go back, or what happens if you put a completely different combination of stitches together. Any of you that have these guided pictograms, I would dare you to start putting some combinations together and see what you come up with, because it's just hilarious. Now, some of them you may not like at all, but some of them could be really extraordinarily beautiful, and you just got to play with it and see with what, how they turn out and whether you like them or not. You can also, instead of doing them like this, you can go down a straight line and then like keep doing like 10 different ones and then go back in the opposite direction. It'll give you different results also. I wish I had pulled out, I did have a sheet with all of those pictograms, guided pictograms on them with some different combinations, and I didn't pull it out. But that means you just got to go and start playing with them yourself and see what you come up with. And I'll try and post a picture after the video is over with tonight. I'll grab that sample and I'll take it out and I'll post some pictures of what all of the different ones that I came up with are. But they're just like a very few combinations that you can put together. Okay. Any other questions?
That's it for now.
All right, so I'm going to go back and we're going to look at some other stitches. And as we're looking at the different stitches, okay, even some of the things like putting together your floating stitches can be really, really fun. But we're going to go back. I want to go and we're just going to take back our project like this. And we're going to do a couple more petals. We're going to do a couple of reviews. And then I'm going to come back in and show you some of the other types of things that I've done. Now, when you're doing decorative stitches like this, the nice thing about if you do have the projection is to be able to see what they look like, right? And so if you don't have that, it's really important that you kind of stitch them out on a piece of fabric first to see how big and how wide they're going to be. I was looking at some stitches and I was thinking that they were going to be about 1 inch wide and they ended up being 1.5 inches wide. So they ended up being a little bit tight. But because I can see the stitches here, I know exactly what they're going to look like before I start. So let's go and start looking at some more exclusive stitches. And we're going to even go back to our pictograms that we've done and do a little bit more over there. So I'm coming back and we've still got lots of good time here. All right. And so as I'm looking at in my eye menu here, we have all of these different shapes, right? And there is a lot of these random shapes that can be used for creating all different kinds of things. It's not meant just to be going to make an outline of something, all right? You've even got a pretty heart here. So menu I3 is all of your pictogram shapes, and I4 is, these are designs, and we have a lot of machines that use these designs, and these work in a little bit of a different way too. And you building them in a little bit of a different way. So I guess I'm going to go and do the, let's say we're going to do the truck. Okay. And we're going to stitch this out because these are some stitches that people haven't necessarily thought about using. And we're going to use the S foot because that's what it recommends. Okay. And this is an example of a stitch that we really should be using stabilizer with. So I'm going to gather myself some stabilizer. Okay. And I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this one right here. All right. So when you're working with these stitches, many of these stitches, if you look at them, it tells you actually on the stitch when you select it, how to do it. And it's going to let you know that when you touch the reverse button, that it's going to change. So right now you have the car in place, right? If I touch the reverse button on the front of my machine, it will change from one stitch to another. Now it's showing you the truck. So let's say I wanted to start sewing with that truck. On my fabric, I see the truck in place. And I'm just going to start sewing. And it's going to start at the beginning of the truck. Now, when I start, if I only want one truck, somewhere while it's stitching the first truck, I'm going to touch the reverse button. All right. And the reverse button will change. It will finish the stitch. And then it will stop. And when the truck is finished, it will go to the next stitch. All right. So that's what I'm going to do. You notice when I start sewing that the truck picture of the image on the projector disappears because it doesn't want to distract you. So I'm touching the reverse button and now it's going to stop and go to the next stitch. And the next stitch is like a Corvette with somebody with long hair at the wheel. And I'm going to touch the reverse button and it'll go and do the next one.
Karen, your camera has come unplugged.
Uh-oh.
I think it's shaking a lot.
Oh, that might be. Let me look and see. Because it looks like it's showing to me.
It is now. It was blacking out before.
Okay.
With that little connect the device notice that you got earlier.
Yeah. All right. Let's see if this stays going. All right. Now I'm going to press the stop button after this, and it's going to finish one stitch and then stop. All right. Now, as I'm going, you see it did the same truck for multiple cars because I didn't touch the reverse button, right? So as I'm going, if I want it to change, maybe now I want to do houses, I can go to a different row of stitching, and now I can see the houses that I want to do. And as I go, there's the fence, and then there's the trees, and then there's a bigger house. So I'm going to do some bigger houses. All right, and I'm going to stop and touch the scissors, and it'll stop at the end of that house. All right, so when I'm looking at my screen, if you're wondering how to do all of these things, a lot of the instructions you can find back on the first page in the Joy OS Advisor. Because if I want to go to sewing and I'm looking for exclusive stitch techniques, we have all of the instructions for how to do these. How to do an applique stitch. You would look here and you would see a video how to do it. We have embellishment stitches, which are the tassels and the crystal stitches. And then under theme stitches, you can go here, all right, and you can read how do you do that. And all the information's here. It says put on the side motion S foot and use stabilizer, load the stitches, right? And then it sews the stitch and it gives you all the information of what you need, all right, and tells you how to do it. And when I touch the word content, it brings me all of those stitches. So let's say I wanted to choose the boats, all right? So it'll bring me that combination of stitches that have all the different boats on it. But all the information on how to do those stitches is built in to your machine. So we have actually quite a few machines that have these types of stitches in them, but the instructions are right there for you to be able to look at. And if you have an older machine that has these stitches and you don't have the instructions, then you can go to the My Sewnet app and you can put in the Epic 3 and it will give you all of the instructions on how to do it, which is pretty phenomenal, I think. Let's see if I go back there into the Joy OS Advisor, because I think sometimes this is the one thing that people don't think about when they're trying to figure out how to do something. They don't realize how much of that information in here. There is the motif builders, all right? So if you wanted to do the motif building stitches with a single stitch, that's the one that I showed you like this, all right? You can go here and you can read how to do it. All the instructions are there. And you can go to the content and it brings you all the stitches that work like that. Look at, there's an actual leaf shape that's in here with the leaf petals for you to work with to kind of fill it in. And if you go to the opposite, all right, if I come back and I go, this time I can keep going. And when I go into motif builders, the second option shows you how to use the motif builder with putting pairs together. Like the heart would be one side of it, and then the other side of the heart would be the second one. We also have floating stitches where there's two different ways of using the floating stitches. One of them is to sew two pieces of fabric together, so you see the floating stitches. And the other is to do that in the middle of the fabric. And when you sew in the middle of the fabric, it's going to show you, and I'm going to show you how to do that because I think a lot of you don't know how to do this with the floating stitches, all right? So I'm going to come into the floating stitches and I'm going to select, let's say I'll just select a quick stitch, all right? This one right here. And I'm going to change my camera over and I'm going to take a piece of fabric. All right, let me just cut this, get rid of this here. All right, whoops, sorry about that. All right, so let's say that I wanted to do this decorative stitch and it might be down the middle of a quilt or it could be in a quilt border. And I wanted to be using it as a decorative stitch. So what you do is you fold it back like this. And I always use the edge joining foot, the one with the bar in the middle. All right. And so you won't be using the walking foot with that one, the IDF. All right. And so that bar is going to come over, and I'm going to line up the fold. Now you might be wondering, all right, how maybe I wanted to do 3 or 4 stitches and then stop. Well, you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can program them in with the older machines, with like the Epic 2 and the previous ones. On the Epic 3, we have a special way of doing it, which is we can open up stitch repeat, and we can go to single stitch program, and we can say, okay, I want 4 of these, and it will do the 4 of them and then stop. Okay. And so I'll stitch that out, and then I can stop and come back and do another 4 anywhere I want to. And that's why they're called floating stitches, because that you can't really tell that they're connected. I think I have a problem with my bobbin. Let me just, yeah, I thought so. All righty. So that was a bad example because my bobbin was giving me a problem here. Just let me double check. Usually I use a bobbin weight thread, and this time I don't. I have a regular thread in there that I never changed when I was working with that pink. So let me just come in here and put this back in here. And if you have a problem like that, you know, there's always a reason. I'm trying using a different camera setting up today, so I'm not sure how successful it is because I keep knocking it with my hand because it has to be in there so close. I'm going to have to rethink this process a little bit. All righty. So now we're there. You heard it though, right? There was a problem. So the nice thing about these stitches is it's really easy to go back to where you want to be. I'm just going to come down here, and I'm going to press stitch. Wait a second here. All right. I'm sure this happens to all of us at different points. It's always a lot harder when you're on. All right. So I'm going to press stitch restart. All right. And I'll show you where that is if anybody needs to know. All right, now I'm going to cut. And when I'm done, there's my stitch. And when I open it, you'll see the decorated stitch there. Do you see how nice that is? And you don't see how it's connected at all. You do see the dark thread underneath there where I've messed it up here. But you get the idea of how nice that looks, right? And so when you're doing those floating stitches, wait a second. And you're looking at them, you can say, I want 4 stitches. And then the next time you want 6 stitches, or the next time you want 8 stitches. And it's really easy to kind of play around and get the look you want. I'm just trying to find my scissors here and trim my threads. And we've got a little bit. Let's check and see with Amy. Does anybody have any questions about those?
We do have some questions, but some of them are going back a little.
That's right.
Somebody had asked, and I believe it was during the theme stitches, whether or not you can change the size of those theme stitches.
The one stitch that you can't change the size, and they're the only stitches you can't bring into embroidery because of the way that they're selected. So, but that's a good try because I would like to change the sizes too, but not. Those are ones that the size are very specific. So what you have is what they go, but they can make some really cute borders. Like if you wanted to sew them along a border of a quilt or something like that. And the nice thing is you don't get bored because you might have 4 trucks, and then you might do some fencing, and then you might do some houses, and you can, I mean, it's really fascinating even for kids to play with it, getting them to play with selecting the stitches like that is kind of fun. Any other questions?
There are some, yes. Somebody would like to know, if you don't have projection, what's your best tips for how do you keep all of those things lined up?
So the first thing I would do is, if you don't have projection, is first of all, draw yourself a line on your fabric so that you know you're going straight, and do a test. See what the biggest stitch is. So if the truck is the tallest, it's kind of actually easy when you think about it, because the way those stitches work, let me just you see they have that line, like it's almost like a road that they're stitching on, right? So what you need to know is how tall is the tallest design. So I know with the boat's got a one that's, I think, a little bit taller than the truck. So I need to know how tall those are going to be so I can figure out if I want to put this in a 2-inch border, is everything going to fit, and where would I want to stitch them? So a lot of times you can stitch these because they do have that straight line. They're really nice for turning corners and doing all kinds of things like that, because you can get you can really plan out where you want them to be. But you're just going to want to draw yourself a line, and even if you do have projection, you still might want to draw yourself a line. It's just a lot easier where you're going. And make sure to use the S foot, because the S foot is for side motion, right? So anything that's wider than 7 or 9 millimeters, depending upon your machine, if the foot is going, the fabric is going to move side to side and back and forth. And so the S foot is meant for side motion, and you're not going to get as good stitch out if you don't have that side motion foot on. Any other questions?
And I have one more. Somebody would, in fact, like to see the stitch restart button, what it looks like.
I will definitely do that. Hold on a second here. I'm going to come back to my camera. And now it's a little bit different depending upon what machine you have, but we all have stitch restart. All right. Sometimes I'll show you on the, let me see if I can do this without, so this one, wait a second here. I got to try and bend this up like this so I can see it. All right. On the Epic 3 and the Quilt 97, that is stitch restart. And on the Epic 2 and our older machines, they all have stitch restart, but it kind of looks like a different symbol. Let me show you what, if I can come back to the camera here. So if you look at the front of your machine, if you have a Diamond or an SE or original Epic, any of those machines, they're going to have a symbol, and it almost looks like a parenthesis. All right. And there's an arrow to it. And so that's the symbol for stitch restart. And no matter where, and often, like say I'm in the middle of a stitch and I have a problem with it and I might need to go back, maybe my thread broke or something like that. I should show you this. This is the neatest trick in the world. All right, we've got 8 minutes left. We have time for this. Let me show you. This is the coolest way to use stitch restart. And I got a couple other things still left to do. Is there any other questions before I go back?
You're good to go ahead.
All righty. So I'm coming back. I'm going to go and get an applique stitch. All right. And I don't even have to do that. I could probably stay with this. I'm going to do the boat. All right. Where's my boat? There's my boat. All right. Wait a second here. I got to just turn this off. Hold on a second here. All right, I'm going to choose this big boat. All right, and you can, all right, so there's my big boat. And there's a lot of fun designs like this. Now, let's say I'm sewing this stitch.
Change your camera, Karen. Change your camera.
It's off again?
No, you're just not on the right camera.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
All right. So I'm going to start sewing, and we're going to pretend that I had a problem right in the middle of stitching. Okay. Now, let's pretend that my thread broke. It didn't, but let's pretend. So how do you go back to that place? And that's the hardest part sometimes when you're sewing decorative stitches. So this is the way you do that, all right? You pull up a piece of stabilizer. Okay, I'm going to touch stitch restart. So it's going to start back at the very beginning. And I need to pay attention to where I stopped. So it did 2 little windows here, and then it came up to do that satin part, right? So I'm going to probably try and stop where that is turning into here. So I'm going to sew on a piece of stabilizer, and I did touch the stitch restart button. So it's going to start doing the wave. And I deliberately chose a very hard stitch to do this to, okay? So now it's coming up. All right, it's doing one turn. It's doing the other turn. And now it's just going from the corner up to here. All right. So I cannot use the cut, because if I use the cut, then the stitch automatically goes back to the very beginning. Did you know that? When you press the selective thread cutter, your stitch will automatically go back to the very beginning of the stitch. So you can't use the scissors, but I'm going to lift my foot up and pull my stabilizer away and cut it, right? So you see where I left off there. And now I'm going to come down and put my needle right where I stopped. All right, it already went to this one place right here. And now I'm going to keep going. Get that thread out of the way there. Let me pull that down. And now I'm right back where I was, and my boat is going to stitch out perfectly. And let me get my scissors. I don't like to sew when I've got all those threads there. So does everybody understand what I did? Isn't that a slick way of solving the problem? Wait a second. Let me get my... All right. Now I'm going to keep going. And now it's going to do the next boat. So when you're done, well, keep going. And I've got one other thing to show you before we call it a day. So if you've ever wondered how to solve a problem with your thread breaks in the middle of a decorative stitch, isn't that a cute way to solve the problem? All right, let's see. We've got 3 more minutes left. How we're doing, Amy? Any questions?
Nope, just lots of oohs and ahs. That's a great idea.
All right, so I wanted to show you one other thing. When it comes to these pictogram stitches that you're going to find, and almost everybody has pictogram stitches that are, wait a second here. All right, so let's say I wanted to make a circle, right? And I'm going to go and create sequence. I'm going to choose this one here. And I've opened up create sequence or programming. Okay. And I'm going to go and get the stitch. And for those of you that have the Epic 3 and the Quilt 97, you also have, there's my circle. All right. And I want to make it denser. So I'm going to change the density. Whoops, not the length. Well, I can change the length too. I want to change the density to make it nice and full looking. Okay. And I'm going to shorten up the length a little bit. Now, I did that all to that stitch first because now I'm going to duplicate it and mirror image it. All right. And so I've got my stitch. But maybe I wish that it looked a little bit more like a circle instead of an oval. So I can shorten up the length of it a little bit, but maybe I wanted to actually move some stitches. Well, I have Stitch Creator, so I can go, nope, I want to go back out. If I go into Stitch Creator, I have to remake that stitch, but if I just touch and hold on the screen, it will let me go into Stitch Creator with the stitch I've already selected. And see, these are needle points. These are where you see that. I'm going to just turn this. So now I can select a needle point. That's where the needle's going in. And I can literally move that so that it will come down. And let's see, I'm going to touch this one right here. And I'm going to move that up. All right. So I can make something look more like a circle because I'm able to actually not only make my own stitches, but I can move the stitches that I have if I don't like them to change the shape of it. All right. Now I'm going to turn on, wait a second. This one here. And I can select each of the stitches. Wait a second. What I want to do is select that stitch and I'm going to select this stitch here. And I've selected all of them and I'm going to move it up a little bit so that I can kind of create a new look to it. So see what's happening is instead of it having kind of like a sharp point, I can change the shape. Here I can come back down. And so if you have any stitch that you don't like, you can literally change the shape of it in Stitch Creator. So for like a lot of times we think, well, I don't particularly like that shape, but that doesn't matter because you can make your own shapes. You can start from scratch and make your own pictograms if you want to. So I hope you've enjoyed this little foray into working with our decorative stitches. And any questions before we say goodbye?
No other questions that I can see.
All right. Well, I just want to let you guys know that Wednesday, April 2nd at 3 o'clock, Meredith is going to be on, and she's going to be talking about sergers because it's April is National Serger Month. And she's going to be talking about using your serger for quilting, which you know I love to quilt with my serger. And then the April 9th at 3 o'clock, Mickey is going to be showing you my Sonnet software on the Mac. So if you've got a Mac and you're interested in, even if you don't have a Mac, you're always going to learn something. So you can join her on the My Sonnet Facebook page. So I hope I will check all the comments. If anybody has any other questions about anything, I'll come back in and I'll try and post a picture of those building blocks that I said that I have some ideas of that I've done with different shapes and stuff like that. So I hope you had fun. Come back and watch it again and then bring out your machine and start playing with your stitches because you're going to have so much fun if you do. Goodbye, everybody.